The night air hangs thick over 19th century London. A suffocating fog that clings to every wall, every lamppost, every breath. The streets glisten with filth, and the stench of the Thames creeps through the alleys like a living thing. People move with scarves over their faces, afraid of breathing too deeply. Mothers hold their children close, whispering prayers as the bells toll from distant churches. Death feels close here, not in the shape of swords or bullets, but in the invisible breath of the city itself. To live in London in 1858 was to live in the belief that the air could kill you. But what if I told you that this terrifying idea, this wrong idea, ended up saving millions of lives? What if the very misunderstanding that haunted generations became the accidental savior of humanity's future? Before we dive deeper into this haunting paradox, make sure you're subscribed to Pioneers in the Dark, because here we uncover the forgotten stories, the misunderstood theories, and the lost minds that shaped history even when they were wrong. Turn on the light of curiosity, because sometimes truth hides inside mistakes that change the world forever. Now, let's travel back, far before London's choking smog, before the hum of industry, before humanity even knew what a germ was. Picture the ancient world, marble cities rising under the Mediterranean sun, where the greatest minds of Greece sought to understand the mystery of disease. Hippocrates, the father of medicine, looked at the world and saw a pattern. People who lived near swamps fell ill, while those in clean air thrived. To him, the explanation was simple. Sickness came from the air itself. Poisonous vapor, a miasma, rose from decay and rot, seeping into the lungs, corrupting the body, spreading death. For centuries, this made sense. It explained why plagues followed the heat, why death clung to filth, and why foul smells seemed to signal danger. It was elegant, logical, and terrifying. The Miasma Theory became the cornerstone of medicine, stretching across continents and centuries. From the fall of Rome to the Renaissance, the belief persisted that bad air was the root of all disease. In a world without microscopes, without germ theory, and without understanding of infection, it was the best explanation anyone had. And so humanity fought the air itself, burning incense to purify it, building cities away from swamps, and wearing strange plague masks stuffed with herbs to filter out invisible poison. But the story truly darkens in the 19th century. The age of industrialization, the age when cities exploded with life and filth in equal measure. London, the beating heart of empire, became a monument to both progress and decay. Factories belched smoke into the sky. Horses filled the streets with waste, and the Thames, once a river of life, became a river of death. Raw sewage poured directly into it, and when the tide rose, the smell was unbearable. The newspapers called it the Great Stink. It was here, in this nightmare of filth and fear, that the Miasma Theory reached its height. Politicians, doctors, and common citizens alike believed that the air itself was the enemy. The invisible miasma, a cloud of corruption and decay, was thought to be creeping through the city, spreading cholera, typhus, and plague. And yet, in this belief, something remarkable happened. People began to clean. Driven by fear of the miasma, reformers demanded action. Streets were washed, waste was collected, and plans were drawn to transform the very anatomy of the city. Among those reformers was Edwin Chadwick, a man both brilliant and stubborn, who believed that cleanliness was the salvation of civilization. He was certain, absolutely certain, that bad smells were the cause of disease. So he fought to build an entirely new sewer system, one that would carry the filth of London far from its people. In 1858, during the heights of the Great Stink, Chadwick's ideas became necessity. Parliament itself could barely function. The smell rising from the Thames was so overpowering that lawmakers fled their chambers with handkerchiefs pressed to their faces. Something had to change. Enter Joseph Bazalgette, a visionary engineer who took Chadwick's miasma-inspired mission and turned it into reality. He designed miles of underground sewers, tunnels that would forever change how cities lived and breathed. When those sewers were completed, something astonishing happened. Disease rates fell dramatically. Cholera, typhus, and dysentery all began to retreat. And here's the irony. The miasma theory was wrong, but it worked. The people believed they were cleansing the air, but in truth, they were cleansing the water. By removing waste from the streets and rivers, they unknowingly destroyed the breeding ground for germs, the very things they didn't know existed. It's one of history's great paradoxes, a false belief that saved real lives. Meanwhile, in the shadow of London's filth, another mind was quietly unraveling the truth. His name was John Snow, a physician with an unshakable belief in evidence. While others pointed to the foul air, Snow turned his eyes to the ground, specifically to the water people drank. In 1854, when cholera struck the Soho district, Snow began mapping the dead. Every death marked a point on his map, and soon a pattern emerged. All roads led to one place, the Broad Street water pump. He pleaded with officials to remove the pump handle, and reluctantly, they did. Within days, the outbreak ended. Snow had discovered the truth that cholera was waterborne, carried not by air, but by invisible agents within the water. But here's the tragedy. No one believed him. The miasma theory was too powerful, too ingrained, too comfortable in its simplicity. Snow's findings were dismissed as coincidence. The world wasn't ready to believe that something unseen, something microscopic, could be the true killer. And yet, Snow's act, removing a single pump handle, marked the beginning of the modern age of epidemiology. It was the moment when data began to challenge doctrine, when science began to rise from superstition. Still, even as the miasma theory began to crack, its legacy endured. The sanitation revolution it inspired continued to spread, not just in London, but across the world. Cities like Paris, New York, and Bombay began to build their own sewer systems, clean their water, and remove the rot that fed disease. And all because people were terrified of a smell. It's a haunting reminder that human progress doesn't always follow truth. It follows fear, necessity, and the desperate will to survive. While London rebuilt itself, another battle raged inside hospitals. Florence Nightingale, the iconic nurse of the Crimean War, was a devout believer in the miasma theory. To her, the stench of infection was proof of disease, and so she dedicated her life to removing it. She demanded fresh air, clean linens, and open windows. She scrubbed hospitals until they shone. Her reasoning was wrong, but her results were undeniable. Death rates in her wards plummeted. Soldiers who would have died in filth now lived in cleanliness. Her war against bad air became a revolution in hygiene that would ripple through the medical world for generations. It's poetic, almost divine, that a mistaken theory could lead to such profound truth. By the late 19th century, science was finally catching up. Louis Pasteur and Robert Koch peered through microscopes and discovered what no one before them could see. The real culprits, bacteria. The germ theory of disease shattered the miasma myth once and for all. But by then, the damage, or perhaps the good, had already been done. The miasma theory had built the foundation upon which modern sanitation stood. It had inspired systems, habits, and structures that made cities livable. Without it, humanity might never have cared enough to clean. And that's where this story reveals its quiet brilliance. In our quest for truth, we often forget that being wrong can sometimes be the most productive state of all. It drives us to ask, to act, to build. The people of London didn't understand germs, but they understood death. They smelled decay and decided to fight it. And in doing so, they accidentally waged war against the true enemy. In that sense, the miasma theory wasn't just a scientific mistake. It was a mirror of human resilience. Because in the face of the unknown, people chose to act, not hide. They built, not surrendered. And in that action, they changed the world forever. The streets of London may have been cleaned, but the world beyond was still drowning in its own filth. Across the oceans, cities were rising, crowded, chaotic, and alive with the same fears that haunted Europe for centuries. In Paris, the air carried the same stench of decay that London once knew. In New York, open sewers snaked through tenement districts where disease thrived in the shadows of progress. Everywhere, people whispered the same word: miasma. The belief had become universal, woven into culture, policy, and even architecture. Hospitals were built with tall ceilings and open courtyards to let the bad air escape. Streets were widened to allow wind to pass through. Even cemeteries were moved outside city walls to keep their invisible vapors away from the living. It wasn't just science anymore. It was psychology, it was faith. And for a time, it worked. Mortality rates dropped, not because the theory was correct, but because the fear it inspired drove people toward sanitation. The cleaner the streets, the healthier the city. The more the stench faded, the fewer lives were lost. It was as though the world had stumbled upon a cure by accident, a cure born not of knowledge, but of desperation. But deep within the laboratories of Europe, the winds of change were beginning to stir. In a small room in France, a man named Louis Pasteur leaned over a series of glass flasks filled with broth. He boiled them, sealed them, and waited. Days passed, nothing grew. Then he broke the neck of one flask, allowing air, and with it, dust to enter. And soon, life began to bloom inside. Not life as in growth, but corruption, decay, rot. Pasteur had proven something revolutionary. The air itself was not evil. It was what floated in it that brought disease. Tiny, unseen organisms, too small for the eye to perceive, were the invisible killers humanity had been blaming on bad air for thousands of years. When Pasteur presented his findings, the world didn't immediately believe him. The miasma theory was too deeply embedded in the public mind, too comforting in its simplicity. It gave people something to fight: a smell, a fog, an enemy they could sense. Germs were abstract, invisible, unseeable, and therefore harder to hate. But in Germany, another scientist was about to change everything. Robert Koch stood over his microscope, peering at the bacteria that had brought nations to their knees. He didn't just theorize their existence, he proved it. Attia isolated the bacteria responsible for anthrax, tuberculosis, and cholera. For the first time in human history, disease had a face, microscopic, yes, but real. This was the death knell of the miasma theory. And yet, it was not a clean death. Even as the germ theory gained ground, the ghosts of miasma thinking lingered. Old doctors still swore by the smell test. Old habits refused to die. Florence Nightingale, by then a global icon, famously resisted germ theory for years, not out of ignorance, but conviction. She had seen the miasma model work. She had seen how cleaning air, light, and water had saved thousands. To her, it was not superstition. It was proof of experience. And that's the strange beauty of this story. Two truths coexisting, one visible and one invisible. The miasma theory gave birth to sanitation, and sanitation made germ theory possible. It built the foundation upon which modern medicine could finally stand. Without miasma, there might never have been a Pasteur. Without fear, there might never have been discovery. As the 20th century dawned, cities around the world began transforming, not just physically, but philosophically. Cleanliness became a moral duty. Governments invested in water treatment, waste disposal, and hygiene education. Public health, as we understand it today, was born. Ironically, this movement was led not by the new believers of germ theory, but by the disciples of miasma. Their obsession with clean air and clean streets became the cornerstone of modern infrastructure. From the underground tunnels of London to the aqueducts of New York, the world built its defenses against disease upon a lie that had once felt like truth. But this story isn't only about science. It's about the human need for explanation, our desperate urge to make sense of the unseen. When death comes without reason, we invent one. When we cannot see the enemy, we imagine it in the fog. And sometimes that imagination drives us to do the right thing for the wrong reason. Even today, echoes of the miasma theory live on. We still talk about bad air in a stuffy room. We still equate smell with sickness. The ancient instinct that our senses can detect danger never truly died. It just evolved. And perhaps that's not such a bad thing. Because even in its error, the miasma theory taught us something profound, that the environment we create shapes the health we live. It taught humanity to look outward at our streets, our water, our surroundings, and take responsibility for them. It made cleanliness not just a virtue, but a necessity. By the time germ theory took full hold, the miasma theory had already cleaned the stage upon which modern medicine would perform. As the dawn of the 20th century broke, the world stood on the edge of a new scientific age. Cities glowed with electric light, hospitals gleamed with sterilized instruments, and laboratories hummed with the quiet revolution of knowledge. The invisible had finally been revealed. Germs, bacteria, and viruses, each one mapped and understood. The ghosts of bad air were gone. And yet, if you listen closely, you can still hear their whispers in the wind. The miasma theory, wrong as it was, had reshaped civilization. It had forced humanity to confront filth, to value hygiene, to see health not as a personal matter, but a collective one. For the first time in history, cities began to care for their people not through fear of God, but through respect for life itself. It's almost poetic, isn't it? A mistake that built the foundation of truth. Science doesn't always march forward in a straight line. Sometimes it stumbles, sometimes it falls, and sometimes, as with the miasma theory, it takes a wrong turn that leads to the right destination. Without that wrong turn, the great discoveries that followed, Pasteur's microbes, Koch's postulates, Lester's antiseptics, might never have found fertile ground. But to truly understand this transformation, you have to imagine the people living in those times. The doctor who scrubbed the hospital floor, believing he was chasing away evil air. The mother who boiled water not because of germs, but because she feared the smell of sickness. The city worker who drained a swamp, not for ecology, but for fear of deadly vapors. They weren't scientists, they were survivors. And together, through error and instinct, they changed the fate of humankind. The story of the miasma theory isn't one of failure, it's one of evolution. It's proof that even false ideas can guide us toward truth. That progress isn't built only on success, but on our willingness to be wrong. And that's the paradox of knowledge. Every generation laughs at the superstitions of the past, unaware that their own beliefs might one day look just as foolish. We may laugh at the fear of bad air. But who's to say that a century from now, our understanding of disease won't seem equally primitive? When we look back, we see a world gripped by invisible terrors, but we also see a world that refused to surrender to them. The people of the miasma era fought for answers, even when they didn't know the questions. They were driven by instinct, guided by fear, and yet they paved the way for modern medicine. That's what makes this story so haunting and so human. Because in the end, truth is never born from certainty. It's carved out of doubt, failure, and the courage to change one's mind. The air that once terrified humanity became the same air that carried the breath of discovery. The very streets that stank of death became pathways to progress. The bad air was never the enemy. Ignorance was. And maybe it still is. Pause, so the next time you breathe deeply in a clean city, or trust the invisible safety of sterilized air in a hospital, remember, it all began with a mistake. A mistake that saved the world. This is Pioneers in the Dark, and if this story made you think, if it made you feel the weight of human discovery and the beauty of being wrong, then don't just move on. Stay curious. Subscribe, because every week we uncover the forgotten stories of how our world was shaped. Not by perfection, but by persistence. And maybe, just maybe, the next great truth will rise from the ashes of today's mistakes.